When you share ideas in the room, when you push back, when you have that strong, assertive opinion, you are seen as someone who drives progress, someone who's not afraid to be a thought leader in the room, and someone who can fight for the business. This is one of the biggest traits that executive leadership needs to see in order to bring you into executive leadership. Welcome to The Art of Speaking Up, a podcast that helps professional women access the limitless potential that lies within them. I'm your host, Jessica Guzik, and my mission is to help you find that spark inside you that has the power to transform your career in ways you may not have thought possible. I'm so excited that you're here. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the Art of Speaking Up podcast. Today, I'm going to be teaching you about the 3 core communication skills that will show people you are ready for leadership. I get very pumped up about this because the mission of my show is to help more women become leaders in the 9-to-5 and corporate world. And one of the most powerful ways that I can help you do that is to teach you to speak with the confidence, polish, and persuasion of a seasoned leader. In order to do this, I'm going to walk through the 3 most common scenarios where you will demonstrate these skills. The 3 scenarios that I'm going to be talking about are number 1, running meetings, number 2, explaining your work and ideas to people, and number 3, interacting with stakeholders. For each of these, I'm going to teach you the difference between how an individual contributor would show up and communicate in that setting versus how a leader would show up and communicate in that setting. I'm going to help you understand how a leader would think differently, speak differently, and articulate themselves differently in these situations. I'm even going to give you examples of exact phrases that a leader would use in order to be super effective. So with that, we're going to dive into the first situation, which is the situation of running meetings. I'm going to explain to you how an individual contributor would think and speak, and then I'm going to contrast that with how a leader would think and speak when it comes to running meetings. So when it comes to running meetings, the thought process of an individual contributor is typically something like, I'm here to share information. I'm here to update my stakeholders. I'm here to walk them through these pieces of knowledge. So the individual contributor is very much focused on their agenda, what topics they're covering, what information they're going to summarize. And as a result, you will hear them saying things like, here's what I'm sharing today. Here's the agenda. Here are the topics we're going to cover. Here's what I'm going to walk you through. Here's this thing. Here's that thing. Here's this other thing. Now, I want to contrast this with the thought process of a leader. A leader is not thinking, I am here to share information or I am here to cover ABC. A leader is thinking, I am here to drive results. I am here to get this done. So they're not focused on the topics and the pieces of information. They're focused on outcomes. They are focused on the end result that they are there to accomplish in the meeting. And as a result, their communication will sound different than the individual contributor. They will probably be saying things like, here's why we're here today. Here's what we are going to accomplish in this meeting. Here is the goal of this conversation. Here's what we will be doing together. As you can see, all of these phrases represent taking action and getting results. So while the individual contributor is focused on sharing information, the leader is focused on taking action and building a sense of urgency in the room. Now, you can probably see why the leader is going to build the stronger reputation. It is very hard for the individual contributor to stand out when all they are doing is sharing information. And in fact, when we are overly focused on sharing information, we tend to blend in because corporate America is a vast sea of people information dumping on one another. So when we become part of that sea of information dumping, it's easy to get lost and it's very hard to distinguish oneself as a leader. Whereas when you're focused on urgency, impact, and taking action, people come away from the meeting thinking, wow, she was really focused on moving things forward. And that furthers your reputation as a highly capable and promotable leader. So the first skill that I want you to take away from today's episode is the skill of communicating in a way that emphasizes results, forward progress, and accomplishing something in the room. This is also sometimes referred to as bias to action. Bias to action is a phrase that is used in the corporate world to describe someone who is a go-getter, who isn't just lollygagging. I love the word lollygagging, but they're not just there to chit-chat, they're there to drive towards a result. Now, before I switch to the second skill that I want to teach, I want to let you know that I have a free worksheet that will teach you in depth how to demonstrate bias to action through the way that you communicate. It teaches you step by step how to incorporate bias to action into your talking points for your next meeting. This way, you will be able to show up and speak like a leader. To grab this worksheet, it is totally free. Click the link in the show notes or go to jessguzikcoaching.com/bias to action. And with that, I want to pivot into the next common situation where your communication skills will help you distinguish yourself as a leader. And that is the situation of explaining your work and ideas to your stakeholders. So I just talked about how the goal is to drive action and drive forward progress in the room. And sometimes in order to do that, we have to educate our stakeholders on key information. So for example, if the action that you're driving towards in the room is that you need your stakeholders to approve a proposal, you may have to first educate them on the different components of that proposal. So even when you're in full leader mode, focused on impact, focused on results, you're still going to have to do some information sharing. That being said, the way that you share the information will either position you as an individual contributor or as a leader in people's minds. So let's start with the thought process and communication of the individual contributor when it comes to explaining their work and ideas. And then I'll contrast that with the thought process and communication style of a leader. So an individual contributor is focused on what? What am I explaining? What is on the slide? What should I talk about? What should I include? What should I cover? It's a very transactional mindset where they're thinking, I have a message, my audience needs to understand it. What will I say? What will I include? As a result, you will hear the individual contributor saying something like, what you're looking at on this slide is blank, or let me walk you through blank. So they're directing their audience to the information and they're very focused on the what. Now, the issue with this is one that I mentioned before. And a nice way to understand this issue is we can call it the information trap. The information trap is where we get overly focused on sharing information. And as a result, we get lost in a sea of people who are dumping information onto one another in a corporate setting. and we become known for sharing information, which means we don't become known for anything really because everyone is sharing information. So instead, the smart thing to do is to pivot to the thought process and communication style of a leader. So a leader isn't focused on the what, they're focused on the why. They're asking themselves, why does this matter? Why is this exciting? Why is this moving the business forward? Why should my stakeholders care? As a result, you will hear them saying things like, on this slide, you will see blank, and here's how this is helping the business. Or you'll hear them say, what I'm going to walk you through next is blank, and here's why we're excited about it. Or on this slide, you'll see blank, which is helping us accomplish blank. All of these ways of communicating are emphasizing the impact and speaking to why that information is exciting and compelling for the business. This is known as results-focused language, and this is one of the pillars of executive communication that I teach inside my program because it's one of the biggest ways that you distinguish yourself as a leader. Individual contributors share information. Leaders tell stories about business impact. They are not there to explain what happened or what they did or what they're proposing. They're there to tell you the story of how their work and their ideas and their team's contribution is leading to successful and exciting outcomes, not just for the business, but for all of the stakeholders in the room. When you pivot to this style of communication, your audience becomes emotionally engaged because you're talking about the wins. You're talking about the things that really get executives excited. And they also come away more impressed by you because they can see that you are thinking bigger picture. You're not just information dumping onto them. You are telling them a cohesive story about how your work is furthering the growth of the organization. As a result, they start to think to themselves, wow, I am really excited about what this project is doing for the organization. And she seems like a great leader because she gets it. When executives have that thought about you, your reputation skyrockets. I was very, very lucky that I learned this style of communication when I started my corporate career at McKinsey. I learned to always tell powerful stories and talk about impact. And because I developed that habit, when I transitioned from McKinsey, which was management consulting, into the corporate world, where I worked as a corporate strategist, I was able to advance very quickly, in part because I used this results-focused language. This is one of the most important things to do in the room to show people that you are not just an IC there to dump charts and numbers and pictures and information onto your audience, that you are a leader who is doing big things and you're there to tell them the story of the big things that you are doing. If you want to get really good at this, I will teach you this skill and I will help you apply it to your specific work and projects inside of my program, the Art of Speaking Up Academy. Okay, let's talk about the third situation where you will be able to differentiate yourself as a leader through your communication skills. And that is the situation of interacting with stakeholders. So a huge part of the day-to-day in a corporate setting or in a 9-to-5 position is having back and forth, off the cuff, dynamic conversation with leaders and coworkers in the room. How you communicate in these off-the-cuff interactions will either have people seeing you as an individual contributor or have people seeing you as a leader. So let's start with the individual contributor thought process and communication style. And then once again, I'll contrast it with the thought process and communication style of a leader. So the thought process of an individual contributor when having off-the-cuff dynamic conversations in the room are thoughts like, the leaders around me know best. I should defer to them. My participation is optional if I'm not the most senior person in the room. They are smarter than me. They know more than me. They have more years of experience than me. If they push back, I should let them win because they have so much more experience than me. As a result, an individual contributor is going to be quieter when there are leaders in the room. They're going to agree quickly with leaders because they believe that those leaders are smarter than them. If they're challenged by a leader, they're going to withdraw and let that leader, quote unquote, win the disagreement. And you're going to hear them saying things that are agreeable. So they'll say things like, good idea, or yes, let's go in that direction, or for sure, we can do it that way. Now, the challenge with this is that while the intention is usually to be respectful and respect the hierarchy, it often reads as passive, and it creates a missed opportunity for people to see you as a thought leader who is capable of holding their own, having an opinion, disagreeing when necessary, and driving towards outcomes in the room, as opposed to just agreeing with other people's suggestions. And when you come off agreeable and people don't see that you have a healthy amount of assertiveness, a healthy ability to get in there and fight for what you think is best for the business, it becomes hard for leaders to trust you with bigger, more complicated things, because when they see you bend easily to their will, then they start to think, well, in what other situations is she going to bend to someone else's will? And the truth is, leaders need to be able to push. They need to be able to fight for what's best for the business. Now, I want to be really clear. When I say fight for what's best for the business, I don't mean being aggressive and angry. I mean fighting in a way that is healthy and mature and represents you wanting to move towards the best possible outcome. When we deeply care about something, we're willing to fight for it. We'll fight for justice. We'll fight for our passions. We'll fight for the things that matter to us. Fight doesn't always have to mean I'm going to punch you in the face. Fight can mean this is important to me and I'm going to make sure it's a priority. That is what I mean when I say they need to see that you have the ability to fight. And I really want you to put yourself in their shoes. If you're a manager and you are hiring people onto your team and your team needs to do complicated, messy projects, you don't want people who are 100% passive or agreeable because that is going to create problems. This is why it is so important to shift from that individual contributor thought process, which is other people know more, I'll defer to others, they must be correct, they're smarter than me, to the leader mindset and thought process. So what a leader is thinking in the room is they're thinking, my company is paying for me to be sitting in this room. Let me give them an ROI on the dollars that they are spending for my time in this conversation. If I'm in the room, I will find a way to add value. If I can't add value, I shouldn't be in the room. It is my job to push for the best possible outcome. It is my job to be in integrity with the direction that I think is best for the business, even if I have to fight for it. That is the mindset of a leader. And as a result, their behaviors are going to look very different than the individual contributor. They're going to be actively contributing, even if there are senior people in the room. They're going to push back if they think that there's a better way to get something done. They're going to hold their ground if they get challenged and they believe that their method is better. And so you'll see them saying things like, I see why that could make sense, but let's dig into the implications. Or I hear your suggestion and I understand why you'd want to go in that direction, but let's pause and explore the trade-offs. Or I like the direction we're going in and I have thoughts on how we can make it even better. These are all things that you will hear leaders saying, and these represent a deep sense of drive, urgency, and responsibility that leaders feel to make the best possible contribution when discussing important topics at work. Now, of course, this requires confidence. You have to really believe in yourself and in your ability to set direction as a leader. This is why I spend a lot of time focusing on confidence inside of my program and when I'm supporting my clients, because confidence is the emotion that fuels your ability to take up space in this way. We have to feel confident inside in order to show up big and communicate like a leader. But when you do this, when you share ideas in the room, when you push back, when you have that strong, assertive opinion, you are seen as someone who drives progress, someone who's not afraid to be a thought leader in the room, and someone who can fight for the business. This is one of the biggest traits that executive leadership needs to see in order to bring you into executive leadership. One of the common reasons that people get stuck right before moving into an executive position is because they have built this reputation for doing amazing work and being super likable, but the leaders in the organization haven't seen them push, haven't seen them fight, haven't seen that bigger internal fire. And I know for so many of you listening, that internal fire is the truth of who you are. The quiet, deferential, meek communication style that you may have fallen into through habit isn't actually the real you. The real you is there to take up space and make an impact in the room. So, in summary, the 3 situations where you will show people that you are a leader through the way you communicate are number 1, leading meetings. I want you to communicate in a way that is focused on results and what you are there to get done in the room. Number 2, when you are sharing information, I want you to share information and talk about your work in a way that emphasizes the impact and tells that bigger story of how your work is furthering the goals of the organization. And number 3, when you're having impromptu back and forth conversations with stakeholders, I want you to join the conversation, even if you're not the most senior person in the room. And I want you to fight for what you believe is best for the business. These actions will help you have more impact. They will help you grow your reputation, and they will help you quickly advance into leadership positions. Now, if you want to work with me in order to develop these abilities, this is what I help you with inside of my program, the Art of Speaking Up Academy. Inside this program, you will do the inner work to build self-confidence so that you have the inner strength to take up more space in the room, and you will learn the core communication skills you need to speak in a way that emphasizes action taking, results, impact, urgency, and fighting for what's best for the business. One of the reasons my clients experience so much growth in this program is because they get to learn those communication skills and do that inner work to build the confidence to take up more space in the room. To find out when the next cohort is enrolling, click the link in the show notes or go to jessguzikcoaching.com/academy. And don't forget to download the free Bias to Action worksheet, which will help you implement the first skill that I taught in today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast and for being a listener. I appreciate you and your time so much. And I will catch you next week. Bye.